Today is Friday the 13th of September 2013, and this is a follow-up video to my earlier videos regarding Lou20764's video of an aircraft carrier sized UFO over Australia that he filmed in the early hours of the morning of 2nd of September 2013. I'm very pleased to have joining me James Oberg, who has an extensive career with rocket scientists. He is in fact a rocket scientist himself, and he's going to give us a bit of insight into what we have seen in Lou's video. I'll bring Jim in right now, and welcome Jim, thank you for joining me. And if you could just give us a brief outline of your career, please, so we know some of your background. Thank you.
I had the great good fortune to be a kid at the beginning of the space age and to be interested in it from the time I can remember. And so in school, and we had Sputnik was launched and the early satellites. I went into spaceflight engineering, got some degrees, some academic degrees, Air Force experience, and then in 1975, at the end of the Apollo program, I was able to move down to the NASA Space Center, where I worked shuttle, and later on designing the orbit of the International Space Station. But I was fascinated, as long with the technology, with the culture of spaceflight, the way spaceflight was perceived and misperceived around the world. I was fascinated by secrets of the Soviet space program, their forgeries and their fakes, and figuring them out. And had a very successful career at both popularizing real spaceflight and discussing and analyzing mythical spaceflights.
Right, so you've got quite an extensive career there, and so if we can just discuss what we've seen in UFO Lou's video, and it was a remarkable capture, we should say that up front. He was very fortunate to have filmed such a site, and identifying this object is what everybody wants to know, of course. And I'll just bring up his video so we can take a quick look at the object. And this is the first video. As he says, he filmed it on the 2nd of September 2013. To start with, he filmed the International Space Station passing over Melbourne at 5:25, and about 22 minutes later, he then spotted this object, which starts at about 4:05 into his video, and I'll just play a bit of that now. We can see the object there, and I'll just find a bit where it zooms up, and we see this interesting shape. It seems to have a sort of a V shape to it, and it's interesting that the flare in front of it is actually in front of the craft and not behind it, and this has caused a lot of interest about what this object could be and how to explain it. So maybe you could speak into that for us, please, Jim.
I'd be happy to talk about the technical solution, explanation for what this was, as well as why it was so hard to recognize, and it's still hard to recognize by a lot of people. When we've seen these kinds of things in the sky before, I say I've never seen them, but people around the world have seen them. They're very rare, and Lou got this excellent video and gave an excellent technical description of the parameters of the motion, the speed, where it was, when it was. He gave information in far greater detail than we usually get on YouTube videos, so he's got to be congratulated both for catching this and for describing it so accurately. That accurate description helps solve it, even though he himself doesn't accept the solution. This kind of thing is happening in the past 50 years, when rockets get into orbit around the Earth. Not just the past 50 years, but more recently in the past 20 or 30. And the reason it's changed is in the past, when a space booster got into orbit, deployed its satellites, its mission was over, it just drifted in orbit, circles the Earth indefinitely, eventually falls back to Earth. Sometimes the rockets would actually explode, even a year or two after the launch. Engineers realized that leftover fuel in the tanks was getting unstable, was mixing together, was eating its way through the isolation seals, and eventually did create explosions, clouds of metal shrapnel that made a big space debris hazard. To avoid that, about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, spacefaring nations began opening the valves and dumping all the excess fuel out of rockets once they had finished getting into orbit. The first question's got to be, how much excess fuel do you have? You think that rockets have to use all their fuel to get into space, but it does turn out, if you look even at a model, that there is going to be some fuel left over. There has to be, because during launch, and of course this is just orange Coke, but during launch, you never want to drain your tank dry, because if you were to suck air or suck nitrogen gas on the tank into a rocket engine on one side of the fuel flow and not the other, the engine's going to blow up violently, possibly destroying the booster and destroying the mission. So there's usually a 2 or 3% margin of extra fuel, which for many of the larger rockets is hundreds of pounds. It's got to be dumped out. When it is dumped in space, you think of a fuel dump for an airliner, you think of fuel streaming out behind in the air. A fuel dump, a fuel leak from a car is left behind on the road. In space, because it's in a vacuum and your motion is keeping you in orbit, that fuel that's dumped is a cloud around your vehicle, and it stays close to the vehicle unless it's sprayed away. If the vehicle is steady, that spray can be a fan-shaped spray moving off into the distance. If the vehicle is tumbling, or slowly, as it often does after finishing its mission, the spray becomes a spiral in the sky. And if you are watching it from the ground in clear weather, and it occurs at sunrise, before sunrise, or after sunset during twilight, and it's sunlit, you have spectacular and inexplicable objects in the sky. If you try to interpret them in Earth-side terms, you're going to be misled. Not because you're stupid or because you're drunk or because you're delusional. It's because you're using your normal Earth-side perceptual patterns of interpreting things you see based on things you used to see and have seen and know about. This is new. These kinds of phenomena, these visual phenomena in space, are totally new after hundreds of millions of years of Earth-side perception. And so it's clear that an ordinary person who is being, as we all are, being cued up by our brain's file of visual experience will use improper experiences to try and interpret it. That's why when someone sees this cloud in the sky, they will use their file of data to see it as a large object, or as a hard object, or as a triangular object. Actually, it was a V-shaped plume of gas. And even more intriguingly, because when the solution was found, that this was in fact the upper stage of a Chinese satellite, Chinese rocket, which had just launched 3 satellites into orbit. When it was later checked by Ted Molczan as to why and when this exactly was happening, we found out that the rocket was passing over Melbourne just 30 minutes after launch, just exactly when people in Melbourne, not just Lou, but several other people who reported, saw it passing overhead from the north-northwest to the south-southeast at a speed of about 1/3 the speed of the International Space Station. That was all things that Lou reported. They're all accurate, and they all nail down the identification of this as the Chinese satellite. Why was it 1/3 the speed? It was actually moving about the same orbital speed, about 1,000 kilometers per hour less, 28,000 versus 27,000 at the different altitudes. But the Chinese rocket was 3 times as high as the International Space Station, so that your angular rate across the sky, viewed from the ground, would be 3 times as great for the space station as it would be for the Chinese rocket. That's exactly the ratio that Lou observed and recorded before he even recognized the significance of it, which makes the observation so valuable. Now, those are the sorts of things that you will notice when people see these kinds of events, these kind of fuel dumps in the sky. It's sad to say that people want to believe it's something more exotic, because someday it may be, because there are lots of things we see up there. This kind of event does not explain all or even most of the things being videotaped in the sky. In this case, this is a clear-cut case, though, where a satellite launching, creating an absolutely unprecedented visual apparition that no witness had ever seen before. And consequently, their interpretations of what they thought they were seeing fell back on, as everyone's does, their background experience in seeing things in the air. And that misled them. They're not delusional, they're not mentally deficient, they're not in any way bad people or bad observers. They are just doing things normally in an abnormal situation. So keep your watch on the sky, keep watching the sky. You're going to see lots of things like this in the future. I've never seen one of these. I've seen other really strange stuff, some spacecraft related, some possibly not. So we keep watching. And Lou, keep your cameras rolling, keep reporting true, and keep an open mind to the almost infinite possibilities of prosaic stimuli to some of the weirdest stuff we ever see. Congratulations, it's a great event, it's a great learning experience for everybody, and get through some of the initial commitments and arguments that people appear to have settled down and gotten past, which is good.
Yes, I think that's an important point about keeping an open mind. when we see something, we really need to investigate the possibilities of what it is. And indeed, in the description to Lou's video that I'm sharing in here, we see in the description here, he asked if anyone can explain what is larger, slower than the ISS in orbit, please let me know. And indeed, this is what you initially tried to do on his video, and other people tried to share with him. It's unfortunate the outcome, the fallout that has happened over the video and the comments that were made. But as I say, and as you have said, it's important to keep an open mind and investigate the facts. I'm just sharing in some of the screenshots and other images. This is an image from Lou's video. I'll just try and bring that up. There we go. Showing his estimated trajectory of this object across Australia. Now it's close, but it's not spot on. I replicated this in Google Earth, and we see a heading here of 140 degrees approximately. I did some research on the launch, and you can see it was at the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center, which is in China, and doing some further searching on that, we get the coordinates of the center. I've got them in there somewhere. Here we go. The GPS coordinates are down here. So I was able to put that into Google Earth, and here we go. This is the launch center right up here. This is Melbourne down here, and this straight line gives us the exact trajectory, which is about 146 and 1/4 degrees, and we've got a distance of 9,839 kilometres. Now it's important to remember, of course, that is on the ground. That's not 1,100 kilometres up into the air. Now you
Dazza, there's one more thing, Dazza.
Yeah.
One more thing is actually you'd have to correct this and shallow it out a little bit. Not all the way to the way Lou had it, but you'd shallow out in the direction he drew, because that is an instantaneous line from Jiuquan down to Melbourne. The actual orbit was in one that, if you looked at the instantaneous line at launch, would lead Melbourne by a good amount, hundreds of kilometers, because during the half hour after launch, Melbourne would rotate eastward under that track. So that this line itself is not a good representation of the path the satellite, the angle the satellite followed. It's closer than Lou's original one, but the actual one moved 30 minutes worth of Earth's rotation. Well, that's Earth rotates at 30 degrees per hour. It would be 15 degrees of longitude. Further, Melbourne would be if you move the point Melbourne 15 degrees of longitude further east. That's where the launch track would be aimed for, because we're talking about a rotating Earth as well as a rotating satellite. The geometry and the motion of in 3 axes and in these different orbits is really unearthly. And people who work at mission control, like I did for 30 years, and to do the kind of planning, take a long time to get their own minds around what's normal, what the rules of thumb, the common sense of outer space is completely different than the common sense of motion here on Earth or even in aviation flight. And so there's nothing at all negative about people who learned about space flight, mostly wrong, from Hollywood, video games, and some great science fiction movies, from Star Trek to anything you want. They learn things that aren't helpful to understanding real space flight. It's difficult to understand it. It is not like you'd expect. And that's why when people see these kind of videos or these kind of things in the sky, they think, well, it's much lower. It's much lower. It's moving much slower. It's it couldn't be a satellite because a satellite would be too small or be this or that. And all these things people set up in their minds to reject the idea that it was a satellite launching and the result of a fuel dump are based on not things they know about spaceflight, which they don't. It's things that they think they know that are wrong. And that it's a matter of, well, if you realize that, then you can learn more about how real spaceflight looks, how launches look, how post-launch fuel dumps look, how gas releases in orbit look, how re-entries look, how disintegrations of these very boosters, when they hit the atmosphere, break up into swarms of horizontally moving fireballs that to many people, time and time and time again, they'll see these swarms of bright fireballs crossing the sky, and they will not just imagine, but their minds will cue up what they normally see when they see lights moving across the sky, which is a fuselage, lights on a large vehicle, thrusters on a big aircraft. And time after time after time for 50 years now, as rockets have hit the atmosphere, burned up, left these swarms of fireballs, people have consistently reported seeing giant objects in the sky, giant motherships, giant alien spacecrafts or CIA spacecraft or blimps or flying triangles. And these are one of the causes for that particular kind of report, is the way people normally interpret what is being suddenly thrown in their face by a totally new visual phenomena involving the reentry, horizontal reentry of a space booster or other kind of space junk. So we have to look in this very intellectually and not instinctively, because in this particular case, in outer space, instinct is going to mislead, is going to lead you astray. It works fine on Earth. It's why we evolved to have those kind of instincts, because they are survival positive on Earth. In space, though, things are so different, through illumination issues, through motion, through just the kind of the movement, relative movement of the viewers and the things they're looking at, that you have to start from scratch. You have to go back to basic principles to see, what are you perceiving, what are you seeing, and can you perceive it correctly? It's really an amazing, kind of exciting new concept. You have to open your mind to the fact that we ain't in Kansas anymore.
Right. I've just got the video, Lou's video up again, and we can see this.
Okay, here's a good case of why it's pointing. The plume is pointing forward, and you can see it's put forward because the stars in the scene here are moving from top to bottom. So it is flying with its plume forward. Now, that's absolutely bizarre. That's impossible to explain in Earthside terms. What Ted Molczan found in his second report was that the booster rocket, once it dropped off the satellites in orbit, lowered its orbits slightly during a half hour after launch. In other words, right over Melbourne. And how it would lower the orbit, that's a good, prudent thing to do, because it then ducks under the satellites and will not recontact them in the subsequent years of operation in orbit. But how do you lower a rocket into a lower orbit? You slow it down. And how do you slow it down? Well, if you're going to be spewing out through the engine bell, for example, fuel you didn't have to burn, if you're dumping fuel, then dump the fuel in the forward direction, and that will be a low-powered jet, a thruster, to slow your speed down. And in fact, as this plume is pointed forward, you'll see some white dots moving up into the head of the plume. Those appear to be the satellites themselves that were deployed as the rocket itself gets into slower and slower in the period of this pass, and the satellites pull ahead. So what we're seeing here is completely consistent with what we know must have happened in orbit, based on the analysis of the subsequent orbits. But in terms of trying to look at them as if it was an aerial phenomena, a naval phenomena, an undersea or ground phenomena, all of those venues, all of those environments will work. Your normal procedures will work, perceptions will work, because we're used to them. They don't work in space. This is a great example, a great learning experience for everybody to realize, don't be misled by Earthside thought processes.
Right. Okay. Now, last night I uploaded another video showing a side-by-side comparison of a video that I produced using Starry Night Pro. Now, what I did to produce that video, I'll just backtrack here a little bit. In Ted Molczan's information that he posted on the SatObs website about the Yalgan 17 rocket, he mentions in his article the TLE information and previous message. Okay, I'm just checking the one I'm on. Now, I've gone to a website, here we go. I used the first TLE of the object. Okay, now a TLE is a two-line element, which is the data for spacecraft trajectory. And I've gone to a website that you can access these TLEs from and downloaded the data for the Yalgan 17 rocket. I imported that into Starry Night Pro and was able to run Starry Night side by side with Lou's video. And actually, I just can't play that there because the controls are hidden. But that's in another video. And we can see in that video.
I've seen it too. I saw it this afternoon. Ted Molczan's seen it. And it's a very powerful demonstration of how the predicted path of this satellite against the stars, viewed from Lou's location, matches the video that Lou put on his own site of stars going by this object. So there's a one-to-one matching of it. This is a marvelous demonstration of why what Lou was looking at was this satellite. And it wasn't the UFO in front of the satellite, because many observers in different locations saw the same effect, and nobody saw both the satellite and the UFO. They saw just the one object, which is the fuel vent from the satellite.
Right. Certainly the match between Starry Night and Lou's video is an absolute one-to-one match. There's no question about that. The timing is exactly the same. It matches with the time that Lou gave, which was about 5:47 for the start of his second camera video. Well, I think we've pretty much.
People who don't want to believe that should go and get their satellite prediction software, run these programs, and to see if they get the same results or different, because no one person's word should be taken for anything. And this is data that can be verified independently. If you don't want to verify it, if it turns out you're incapable of verifying it, then find someone who can, because people should know how to use these kind of tools, not just for this case, but for future cases, so that a lot of this early on fuss about what it couldn't be, what it had to be, can be avoided by people using available tools and available information that a lot of folks never seem to realize had existed already. Go out and do it. Let's get our wits sharper and keep our eyes on the skies.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I'd like to encourage Lou to keep on doing what he's doing, but to do it with an open mind. And certainly if he films something like this, be open to suggestions, be open to information. This is where things really came unstuck, when comments such as your own, Jim, were deleted from underneath the video, and a number of people were banned from commenting further. Now that's where I took exception to the video and stepped in. I certainly haven't accused Lou of faking this video. It is a genuine video, and as we both agree, it is a remarkable video and one that he should rightly be proud of. But the mistake that he made,
as well as his own independent report as an observer, describing its motion, its direction, its speed, its appearance. Those eyeball observations vastly increase the quality of the utility of the videotape, and they are exemplary. And I wish more observers would be as good as Lou was in his description of this event.
Yes, and indeed, it is a shame, really, because this video could be posted on a number of different space websites. If it's clearly identified for what it is, the Yalgan 17 rocket, as opposed to an aircraft carrier-size UFO, I'm sure that it would be posted on a number of various space websites as a special video of interest. So, I would quite like to be able to draw a line under this with Lou and move on, and call it a learning experience, chalk it up for experience. And as we both agree, Lou, keep on making your videos, but certainly do it with an open mind. And if people step in and try and suggest possible solutions for you, or identifying information, then consider what they have to say. Please don't delete their comments. Be open-minded about it, and post your videos far and wide, because they are interesting, and we do want to see them. Jim, I think we've pretty much covered it, unless there were any other questions that have been raised in the comments under the videos. You've been responding to a number of comments, both on Lou's video and under my videos. So is there anything else you need to cover? Or?
People can go visit there for specific responses. The discussions have become productive. Still not so much arguments as requests for explanation, requests for can you explain this, how do you explain that. Those are all legitimate questions and challenges going back and forth, and there was some time wasted and some energy wasted, but that's behind us.
Yes. Now I'm pleased to see that Lou has actually unblocked you, and so you're now free to comment on his videos. I appreciate that, and it is his website, and he can allow whoever he wants, and there's no objection to that. My concern was that not only was he blocking the information, but people on their website and he were still posting things that couldn't be explained. They were making claims saying no one can explain this, no one can explain that. We could explain it, they just weren't letting us put the information on the site. That did dismay me. Right. Okay. Well, thanks again, Jim. I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And, it's been fun. I've made some good new friends. Yes, it's been very interesting, hasn't it? And nice to meet you. And I look forward to maybe having you comment on. It'd be nice to have you comment on some more videos, maybe at a later time. We'll see more. There's more out there. Yes. And sometime we'll find something we can't explain. Right. It's bound to happen. Okay, so thank you, Jim, and as always, do check out my Facebook discussion page. That's Voices of Reason to Explain X, or VORTEX. I'll put a link in the description area. Thank you for watching.
Good night.
Hello YouTube, this is Dazza the Cameraman. Today is Friday the 13th of September 2013, and this is a follow-up video to my earlier videos regarding Lou20764's video of an aircraft carrier sized UFO over Australia that he filmed in the early hours of the morning of 2nd of September 2013. I'm very pleased to have joining me James Oberg, who has an extensive career with rocket scientists. He is in fact a rocket scientist himself, and he's going to give us a bit of insight into what we have seen in Lou's video. I'll bring Jim in right now, and welcome Jim, thank you for joining me. And if you could just give us a brief outline of your career, please, so we know some of your background. Thank you.
I had the great good fortune to be a kid at the beginning of the space age, and to be interested in it from the time I can remember. And so in school, and we had Sputnik was launched, and the early satellites. I went into spaceflight engineering, got some degrees, some academic degrees, Air Force experience, and then in 1975, at the end of the Apollo program, I was able to move down to the NASA Space Center, where I worked shuttle, and later on designing the orbit of the International Space Station. But I was fascinated, as long with the technology, with the culture of spaceflight, the way spaceflight was perceived and misperceived around the world. I was fascinated by secrets of the Soviet space program, their forgeries and their fakes, and figuring them out. And had a very successful career at both popularizing real spaceflight and discussing and analyzing mythical spaceflights.
Right, so you've got quite an extensive career there, and so if we can just discuss what we've seen in UFO Lou's video, and it was a remarkable capture, we should say that up front. He was very fortunate to have filmed such a site, and identifying this object is what everybody wants to know, of course. And I'll just bring up his video so we can take a quick look at the object. And this is the first video. As he says, he filmed it on the 2nd of September 2013. To start with, he filmed the International Space Station passing over Melbourne at 5:25, and about 22 minutes later, he then spotted this object, which starts at about 4:05 into his video, and I'll just play a bit of that now. We can see the object there, and I'll just find a bit where it zooms up, and we see this interesting shape. It seems to have a sort of a V shape to it, and it's interesting that the flare in front of it is actually in front of the craft and not behind it, and this has caused a lot of interest about what this object could be and how to explain it. So maybe you could speak into that for us, please, Jim.
I'd be happy to talk about the technical solution, explanation for what this was, as well as why it was so hard to recognize, and it's still hard to recognize by a lot of people. When we've seen these kinds of things in the sky before, I say I've never seen them, but people around the world have seen them. They're very rare, and Lou got this excellent video and gave an excellent technical description of the parameters of the motion, the speed, where it was, when it was. He gave information in far greater detail than we usually get on YouTube videos. So he's got